So in this video, I'm going to show you one of the best Ice Shard builds for the Sorcerer. You'll do millions of damage and you'll be able to farm Nightmare dungeons 15 to 20 levels higher than yourselves very easily and quickly. So let's check this out. Okay, so I'm going to show you clearing this dungeon, and you'll see that I'm not going to get one-shotted by any white mobs that are 15 to 20 levels higher than myself. You'll see I'm doing millions of damage. And I'm also going to destroy this boss. And with this build, you should be able to clear high Nightmare dungeons in about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the dungeon layout. Now, don't get me wrong, the other builds on the Sorcerer are good as well, like the Arc Lash build, Firewall build, Blizzard build, Meteor build. But you'll see that using those builds, you're going to take maybe 10 to 15 minutes to clear a dungeon, compared to this build where it should only take you about 5 to 10 minutes. So with this build, you should be able to level up the quickest. Okay, so first let's check out the skills we're going to use. And of course, our main skill is Ice Shards. This is going to be our main damage dealing skill. The next skill you're going to use is Frost Nova. This will basically freeze the enemies and apply vulnerability to them. Now, the next 3 skills you want are going to be defensive skills. So Flame Shield, Ice Armor, and Teleport. Now, the last skill I have is Defreeze, but this skill you can switch around depending on your playstyle. I personally like Defreeze because it's a get out of jail free card. Let's say you teleport into a group of mobs, but you didn't realize your Frost Nova was on cooldown, so you can defreeze instead and get out of there. Or let's say you get CC out of nowhere and you can just defreeze to get out. But there are some other skills you can use instead of defreeze. You can use Inferno, you can use Blizzard, or you can use Meteor. But just be aware, these skills are going to be more supporting skills. This is still the Ice Shard build, even though you have Blizzard or Meteor equipped. And next, for the enchantments, of course you want Firebolt so you can apply burning to enemies. Now for the second enchantment, you do want to switch around if you're either fighting a group of mobs or a boss. Now if you're fighting a group of mods, you want Ice Shards for your second enchantment, because basically when you freeze the enemies with your Frost Nova, the Ice Shards will pretty much destroy them. But when you're fighting bosses, you want to switch the Ice Shard enchantment with the Frostbolt enchantment. The reason why is having the Frostbolt enchantment will apply chill to your skills, and this will greatly increase the stagger time for the bosses. And of course, once the bosses stagger, you'll completely destroy the boss. So that's pretty much the skills you want to use with this build. But like I mentioned, you can switch around defreeze depending on your playstyle. Okay, so next let's check out the gear, and I'm just going to go over the important stats for each piece of gear. Now I'm going to show you some other pieces of gear that you can use, but you do want to eventually switch them out. So starting with the helmet, now the stat you're looking for is cooldown reduction, because cooldown reduction is a rare stat on pieces of gear. And the legendary aspect is Frost Nova gains an additional charge, but the cooldown per charge is increased by 30%. Now having that additional charge on Frost Nova is huge for this build. Not only you freeze the enemies, but you also apply vulnerability. Having that extra charge is good for the ability Enhance Frost Nova, because every time we kill an enemy that's frozen by our Frost Nova, our cooldown is reduced. Now the best chest piece to use for this build is the Raiment of the Infinite. This is a unique chest piece, and when you teleport, you do pull and stun close enemies. This will allow you to zip through the dungeons and pull all the enemies together. Now next, the gloves. Now the stat you're looking for is ranks of Ice Shards and critical strike chance, and the legendary aspect is you deal 19% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Okay, so next, the pants. Now I do want to mention the 2 pieces of gear where you want damage reduction is either your chest piece or your pants. Now since I'm using this unique chest piece, the Raiment of the Infinite, for the pants you do want defensive stats, so you're looking for damage reduction stats and armor stats. And for the legendary aspect, I have you gain 0.5 increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 50%. Now for the boots, the stat you want is ranks to teleport and ranks to Frost Nova and movement speed. Now I don't have ranks to Frost Nova, but ranks to Flame Shield and mana cost reduction is also good. And for the legendary aspect, I have Flame Shield lets you move unhindered through enemies. Enemies you move through while Flame Shield is active are immobilized for 3 seconds. This basically allows you to move through mobs if you get stuck, and this applies a huge amount of stagger to bosses. Now for the wand, you're looking for straight damage and critical strike damage. And for the legendary aspect, I have Ice Shards pierce 4 times, dealing 21% less damage. Now for the amulet, what you're looking for is movement speed and cooldown reduction. And for the legendary aspect, I have you deal 50% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Now for both the rings, I do have the same stats. So critical strike damage, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and vulnerable damage. This is basically the best stats you want for the rings, but there are other stats that you can use. And for the legendary aspect, for the first ring, I have your mana regeneration is increased by 26% if you have not taken damage in the last 3 seconds. This is just in case if I do run out of mana, my mana will regenerate really quickly. And the second ring's legendary aspect is the avalanche key passive now applies to one 1 additional cast. This just increases my damage for my ice shards. And last but not least, the offhand. And the stat you're looking for is damage and cooldown reduction. And the legendary aspect I have is that you deal 24% increased damage while you have a barrier active. Okay, that's pretty much the best gear that you want for this build. Now here's another ring that you can use. Basically, you can get more maximum mana or resource regeneration if you're having mana problems. Now there are 3 unique equipments that a lot of people are using, but you do want to eventually switch them out. The reason why is some of the stats on the unique pieces are not needed, and it's basically a waste. So finding a rare or legendary with better stats will be more beneficial. And the only reason why you want to use these unique gear is that they're just easy to get. More than likely, you'll find these unique gears before you find a rare or legendary with the best stats. So first, starting with the Frostburn gloves. Now these unique gloves are good, but like I mentioned, once you find gloves like this with plus ranks in ice shards and critical strike chance, you'll see that using these gloves, your damage will be a lot higher compared to using the Frostburn gloves. Next piece of equipment is the pants. I see a lot of people use the Ice Heart Brace, and these unique pants are good, but since the major damage reduction is either your chest piece or your pants, you do want damage reduction on your pants because this unique chest piece is a lot better than these unique pants. And if you use these unique pants compared to damage reduction pants, more than likely you're gonna get one-shotted by white mobs 15 to 20 levels higher than you. Now the unique aspect on the Ice Heart Brace are good because basically you can have a chain of Frost Novas, but getting damage reduction will be more beneficial if you want to farm high-level nightmare dungeons. And last but not least, the Penitent Greaves unique boots. Now these boots are good because they provide movement speed, but all the other stats aren't as good compared to if you find some boots like this, and the unique aspects on these boots aren't that great. Okay, so next let's quickly check out the skills. So of course I put a point in Firebolt to use the enchantment effect. I put a point in Frostbolt, and the reason why is you want to use this enchantment effect against bosses and switch it out for the Ice Shards enchantment. Having the Frostbolt enchantment will stagger the boss a lot quicker, so you can unleash your full potential damage to them. Next I put 5 points into Ice Shards, 1 point into Enhanced Ice Shards, and 1 point into Destructive Ice Shards. And of course this is the main skill we're going to use. Next I put 1 point into Devastation and 3 points into Elemental Dominance. Next, for the defensive skills, I put 1 point into Flame Shield, a point into Enhanced Flame Shield, and a point into Shimmering Flame Shield. 1 point into Teleport, a point into Enhanced Teleport, and a point into Shimmering Teleport. 1 point into Ice Armor, a point into Enhanced Ice Armor, and a point into Shimmering Ice Armor. 1 point into Frost Nova, a point into Enhanced Frost Nova, and a point into Mystical Frost Nova. I put 1 point into Elemental Attunement and 3 points into Glass Cannon. Next, for the Conjuration skills, I put 3 points into Precision Magic, 1 point into Align the Elements, and 1 point into Protection. Next, for the Mastery skill, I put 1 point into Icy Veil and 3 points into Snap Freeze. This will allow you to kite enemies very easily. I put 1 point into Inner Flame and 3 points into Devouring Blaze, and Devouring Blaze drastically increases our damage. Next, for the ultimate skill, I put 1 point into Defreeze, a point into Prime Defreeze, and a point into Supreme Defreeze. This skill is our get out of jail card, and this will basically help reduce your cooldowns even quicker. I put 3 points into Permafrost, 3 points into Hoarfrost, 3 points into Icy Touch, and 3 points into Frigid Breeze. And last but not least, the key passive, I put 1 point into Avalanche. Now I do want to mention there are some skills that you can switch around. For example, if your offense is really good but you're still lacking in defense, what you can do, you can drop a couple points in Glass Cannon and apply the points into Mana Shield or Protection for more defense if needed. Okay, so next but not least, the Paragon Board. Now, I do want to mention that I did spend hours on this Paragon Board perfecting it. The thing is, you don't want to just pick out what sounds good. You basically need to look at your character stats and see what is needed. And you also want to pull up a damage calculator to optimize your damage. But of course, if you don't have time and don't want to do all the damage calculations, you can basically follow this Paragon Board. Okay, so first, just go up this path. And the first glyph socket I have here is Destruction for the critical strike damage. And of course, critical strike damage is a huge multiplier for your damage, so this is very important. Then of course I went up this path, and for the second board I went for the Frigid Fate board, and on this board I went up this path. And for the glyph socket I have Tactician. The reason I put this glyph node is it provides bonuses to rare nodes, and you get increased 10% damage for using a defensive skill. Now the bonus I'm getting for this node is getting vulnerable damage, which is a huge damage boost. So once here, you do want to go up this way. And for the third board I went for Icefall, and basically I went through this path. And for this glyph socket I put Frost Frostbite for additional chill damage to enemies. Then I went down this path, and for the 4th Paragon board I went with Enchantment Master, and then of course go through this way. And for this glyph socket I went with Flame Feeder for increased burning damage, and for the additional bonus you deal 10% direct damage to burning enemies. And then you want to follow this path to the 5th board, and for the 5th board I went with Burning Instinct. And the glyph socket I have in here is the Exploit glyph socket, which increases vulnerable damage. And then of course I went up this path. In the last Paragon board I went with Searing Heat, and for the glyph socket I went damage to crowd control enemies. And the reason I went with this for the last Paragon board is for the critical strike damage. Next, you do want to look at your stats on the side like strength, intelligence, willpower, and dexterity, and make sure you get the bonuses for your rare node. Now this was just a quick overview of the Paragon board, but I'll have a link in the description with this full build and the Paragon board if you want to check them out. Okay, so thanks for checking out one of the best Ice Shard build for the Sorcerer. And like I mentioned, this build is very good for clearing high nightmare dungeons very easily and quickly. You should be clearing dungeons within 5 to 10 minutes without having an issue. But just beware, if you're trying to complete tier 100 nightmare dungeon or kill Uber Lilith, you do need a completely different build. And I'll share those in the future, so stay tuned. But of course...